Hello and good morning or good afternoon from wherever you're joining us. This is Shaping the Future of Food from the Institute of Agriculture and Trade Policy, and we'll get ready to start in the next minute or two while people are coming in and joining us. In the meantime, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. Maybe let us know what the weather is like where you're coming from or where you're currently at. Right here in Minneapolis, we're expecting a storm, a winter storm, maybe with some rain and snow. So it's going to be a messy commute for us coming back this afternoon. Hopefully, wherever you are, the weather is a little bit better.
I don't know, Claudia. I love the snow, so I'm excited about the storm. It isn't the best for driving, but I do appreciate it's very beautiful outside.
Yeah, once the snow is fallen, I think it's nice. It's just in between, right to get there. Again, welcome to Shaping the Future of Food. While you're joining us, please just let us know where you're calling in from or where you're joining us from, and maybe what the weather is like. Like I said, Minneapolis is going to be a little bit messy this afternoon, so we're all hoping that we can. Those of us who are in the office, we're kind of keeping our fingers crossed that we can get home. We'll give just one more minute for people to join us before we get started. Thierry, winter is not there yet in Belgium. Good. Okay, well, it's a couple of minutes after the hour, and we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for the final Shaping the Future of Food. My name is Claudia Arant, and this is the final session for 2025, where we'll take a look back and a look ahead to next year. And you're going to hear from all of our program staff this session, as well as our executive director. And we'll get started with a little bit of housekeeping. Lily, if you can go to the next slide. So we've all been doing these sessions for many years now, but I just kind of want to highlight the best way of doing it if you want us to see your questions. So use the Q&A for your questions, chat for comments, and we do have closed captioning available in the session. You can click the CC button to enable that feature, and the CC button should be on the bottom of your screen in the menu bar. And we will take some time at the end to respond to some of your questions. Some of you posted some questions when you registered, and we've pulled a few of those. And if there are some additional ones that come in through the chat, we'll go ahead and look at those as well. Otherwise, we will follow up with each of you with a recording and a summary of the session. So don't worry if you miss something or if you don't see something, we will send out the recording as well as some links and information following up. So who is IATP? Most of you have been joining these sessions for the last year and a half now. But here's just a quick highlight. We are a nonprofit research and policy organization that is dedicated to the realization of just and resilient food systems. We work at the intersection of food systems, climate change, and international trade. And last year, we launched these virtual programs called Shaping the Future of Food, where we provide an overview of IATP, who we are, and what we do. And today, as we're getting ready to wrap up 2025, we will hear from our program staff and executive director who's going to kick us off. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our executive director, Sophia Murphy, who will start with an overview of IATP in 2025 and a brief look ahead. Welcome, Sophia. You're on mute.
One always has to start it off. Thanks so much, Claudia, and welcome everyone. It's great to be here. I'm just past my fifth anniversary as executive director at IATP, so I feel like I'm at a moment of reflection. And as Claudia said, almost 2 years since we began this whole series. So we wanted to start with a sense of who IATP is and what we do, and over time we've evolved to answer more of your questions, get more into the work. We feel like we have a community of people who are really invested in the difficult questions that IATP is asking and are so grateful for that community. And as ever, this will be at a pretty high level. So bear with us if it's familiar ground and don't hesitate to send those questions. And we are committed to following up as well. So, as you many know, we are this public education organization. Our work is rooted in research, in coalition and networking, especially with food movements here in the US and around the world. And we're invested in public policy recommendations. And it's been a pretty tumultuous time for those of us who are looking to public institutions to bring change this year, especially in the United States. But we remain very committed to that and to writing what I think in the zeitgeist we'd call a new narrative to protect everyone's right to decent and nutritious food that emerges from just and resilient food systems. So, 17 staff, three offices, most of us here in Minneapolis, but also staff. Karen will be speaking to us from Washington, D.C., and we have two staff as well in Berlin. Almost 40 years old, so not quite yet, but by 2027, we're planning a big party to celebrate 40 years in existence. And this year and next, a budget of roughly $2.4 million. So that's what it takes, mostly just to hire us and to do the work. We don't have big capital expenditures. We have staff who work in decent conditions, I'm glad to say. And that budget is mostly raised from foundations, and we're very grateful and have good working relationships with a number of foundations that really make our work possible. But of course, we also rely on individual donors, people like you, people who've supported them, some of us, for a very long time through that history. And I'm asking everyone today, if you can, to think about whether you might make a donation of some kind to us. We would really appreciate it. It's money that tells us that we're doing something that people find meaningful, and of course, helps us to do the work that we do to have that kind of general support. So just put that out there for you now to think about. What about some highlights of the year? I guess it's a dramatic start to say, but true, that we sued the government and won. We found ourselves, like very many organizations and universities across the country, facing federal grant cuts without much reason or excuse. We were supported with Earth Justice and other pro bono legal organizations to join a suit with, I think, five other organizations. And we were successful, perhaps more in principle than in practice, because the grant wasn't extended. But it was an important thing to do. And it is a reminder that while IATP has had a good year, I'm glad to say, many of the organizations we work with and systems that we're trying to build around food justice have suffered because what had been a big public policy victory to get significant federal investment in things like putting good food on kids' plates in schools, many of those programs have been cut in this new administration. And a lot of the allies who were seeing an expansion of their work, especially for racial justice and social equity, have seen them work cut back. We also joined a different kind of fight with the members of the Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Agriculture, which is kind of a unique experiment in the country that had an office in the University of Minnesota that was dedicated to listening to and supporting the work of sustainable agriculture across the state. They are similar things around the country, but none quite like MISA, I think, which had a sort of informal board of the member and partner organizations, of which IATP was one. The university, in its new reality, which is very big cuts to research, which has subsidized a lot of the work then for the university as a whole, has said it's time for MISA to disappear or find a new home. And we're fighting that, fighting the idea that there shouldn't be a home within the university, a public land grant university that is responding to the growing movement of farmers who want better conservation practices, more integrated sort of marketing systems for produce that's grown in ways that are climate friendly, socially more equitable, economically viable. So we feel the need is bigger than ever, and have been part of that push, and now are housing a grant that supports a kind of reflection. Okay, what would the next 20 years of this institute look like, and where best might it be held? And the last thing I would reflect on from the year from my side, there'll be lots of program content coming, but we've published, working together with my colleague Calvin, we've been part of a team that has produced a draft model trade agreement. What else would we want from global rules for trade that would show greater solidarity, that would reinforce countries looking to have more resilient and fair food systems, and for trade to be a part of that rather than in conflict, as it so often is, as it is written at the moment. And if this administration has sort of thrown all of the trade rules up in the air, it's a chance for us to say, what would we like to rebuild? And looking ahead, I feel like the big themes for us at IATP will be some of that rewriting. We've seen a lot of what were sometimes outdated and not especially just social contracts, agreements between citizens and state on what we should have. A lot of that has been broken by the administration we have now in place. And I feel that it's an opportunity for us as well to be deciding what we want to rebuild. We need new rules for trade. We need definitely a new kind of farm bill, more perhaps like a food bill, some kind of agreement on, as a public, what are we looking for from public health, from an environment, from an economic justice point of view, a racial justice point of view as well. And I think that there is opportunity for that to happen in the midst of this chaos, as long as we can all hold on, and keep our energy, um, not just for the fights in the moment, but also for the change we want to see ahead. I'll stop there. I believe I'm handing over to Ben to pick up from our rural strategies and climate program work. Thank you.
Thanks, Sophia. Yes, I am Ben Lilliston. I am the Director of Climate and Rural Strategies at IATP. I'm going to talk a little bit about the work we've done this year, and then at the end, look ahead. I'm not going to be able to cover everything. I realized it is one of the good things about doing these types of things at the end of the year is you do get to look back and see all the work that we did do. Sometimes it feels like you're just in the daily fight of some of the chaos that's coming out of Washington. But I think we did a lot of really good work that will put us in a good position moving forward. So in the climate front, pretty tough year. The Trump administration pulled out of the Paris Agreement almost immediately at the beginning of the year. And we had to rethink some of our international work as a result of that, but we still did do some important work. We continued to engage at the UN United Framework Convention on Climate Change around carbon markets, and they're trying to develop these global carbon markets. We keep trying to push back against them and to make sure that they're fair for farmers and actually resulting in climate responding to the climate crisis. We also put out a really important report at the most recent COP that Sophia helped write around deforestation and the role that trade and agricultural expansion plays in deforestation and the need to adjust trade rules in order to respond to that crisis. In the US, of course, we saw a lot of the work that had been done previously be dismantled. And one of those key areas was under climate disclosure rules. The SEC had set up new rules to require publicly traded companies to disclose their climate risk and their emissions. The Trump administration threw that out the window. But so we put out our own scorecard for meat and dairy companies for the first time to show what they're disclosing, what their climate plans are, how they're addressing climate risk. And you can see that on our website. We put out a major report on the emissions of some of the biggest meat and dairy companies with our partners. That was in September, just to show the scope of emissions from this particular industry and to try to lift up accountability for those companies that control this sector. And we also put out a big paper around insetting. So this is something that companies are doing within their own supply chains. But are they really benefiting farmers, those types of programs, and are they really reducing emissions? We dug into some of those case studies in that paper. Obviously, what's happening at the USDA is a big part of our work right now. They've eliminated basically the mention of climate change. This Trump administration, they've pulled back on climate hubs, which was a really important resource for many farmers around the country, as well as eliminating a climate smart commodity program that had some really good projects within it. Um, Congress, so we've been fighting to protect money that we won last year in the Inflation Reduction Act around conservation spending. And it has had some successes in protecting the money, although it's rephrased and climate is now no longer a priority within that spending. But we still think that there at least there's some protection for farmers who are trying to do on-farm conservation, and can still access more resources. The staffing cuts at USDA have been really harmful, and we continue to try to push back against that. Um, I think the Farm Bill itself, I know we got a few questions leading up to this webinar, people asking about the Farm Bill. Very concerned about the future of the Farm Bill. There was a breaking at the budget at Trump's big, beautiful bill that passed, sort of a breaking of the traditional Farm Bill coalition, where anti-hunger groups faced massive cuts to SNAP programs, and then farm programs or farm commodity growers in particular got additional money. And traditionally, to pass a farm bill, you need those two coalitions to come together. That was broken earlier this year. And so it puts the farm bill in a very difficult situation, not only currently as we exist, they were only able to pass an extension this year, but I think for the future farm bills. So in some ways, it puts a lot of those programs in jeopardy. In other ways, it's a new context and perhaps a new opportunity to rethink this major piece of food and farm policy. And then I'll mention in Minnesota, we continue to be active. We served on an advisory board for Minnesota's climate action framework that's being finalized, I think, this month. I think they'll come out with it either later this month or early January, about how to implement some of the state's climate goals. And of course, agriculture is a big part of that. We continue to work with partners on how to make conservation programs in Minnesota work better, reach more farmers, not go to factory farms. So those are some of the main areas of focus that we've had over this last year. Next year, we are excited about California putting together actually a much stronger climate disclosure rule than what was at the federal level. Those new rules come into effect January. So we'll be looking at what some of those companies, the meat and dairy companies in particular, but any agribusiness company that does business in California. Of course, you have to be a big company to have to do this kind of reporting, but how they're reporting on climate risk. And later in the year, they'll have to report on their emissions. So both of those things are kind of exciting. A lot of other states are looking at the California model, including New York, including Minnesota, maybe considering that. So other states are looking at climate disclosure in the wake of what's happening at the federal level. I think the Farm Bill, as I mentioned, still an opportunity to make the case for the kind of farm policies and food policies we want. And we'll continue to do that throughout the year, including the role of climate change in agriculture and food. And then we're building out a new area of work next year around climate risk. We see this as a bit of a gap for farmers and our food system broadly. It's a policy gap where we're not really addressing how disruptive climate change is to farmers in our food system and how we need to align policies better around climate risk. So we look excited about that. I'll end there. Happy to answer questions and dig in more on some of the things I just raised. I'm going to pass it on now to Karen Hansen-Kuhn, who directs our trade and international programs.
Thank you, Ben. So as Sophia said, this has been a challenging year on trade policy. We started out the year, a lot of our focus was on tariffs. Tariffs really hadn't been a big focus for our work on trade for a long time because average tariffs goods coming in and out of the US was pretty low. It was like 3%. And so suddenly there was this slew of new tariffs and people arguing about what the meaning was. So a lot of our work initially was just putting in clear terms, what are tariffs? How are they used for? What might the impacts be? And that's something we continue to do to kind of explain these issues. But I felt like that was a helpful piece of work as we were all trying to make sense of something that was so confusing. I will say, for me personally, a highlight of that work was a webinar I did with Erin and her colleague Nora in our community foods program on information on tariffs for local foods professionals or state nutrition agencies. It was a way to reach new audiences beyond the people already immersed in these issues. So I think that continues to be an issue, but as the year went on, we did see more content on exactly what the administration is proposing on trade policy, so we have been responding to that. I would say for this year, a lot of our focus has been on building alternatives that are important now, but that will carry forward as well. One issue is that, of course, we need to critique the existing proposals, but it would be a mistake if the conclusion was that the choice is between Trump's trade policies and what we had before. Trade policies are choices, and we can make other choices. So a lot of our work is about thinking through what those choices might be. Sophia described the AOA Agreement on Agriculture Reimagined project, and she can say more about that, but it is a really important initiative bringing together people from different countries to think through what are the principles we need if we're going to approach these issues differently. How could you get to a model treaty? I would say I've been following all of this as they've been developing and making comments from time to time, but I think one important highlight was a meeting they organized in Nairobi, Kenya, that brought together farmers and experts from around the region to respond to these initial drafts and to learn from them about their priorities. And so I hope we'll continue to do those kind of events moving forward. Another big issue for us has been the review of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA. Under the terms of the agreement, starting in July, they began a review of the agreement with the idea that if the three countries cannot agree on how it should be extended, then a process would start to dismantle it with meetings over 10 years. So it's hard to know what will stick in this current environment, but it is an important opportunity for us to look back on what's happened with USMCA, what could change, and certainly to be bold about it, because we are in this new situation of flux in proposals. So we looked first at what had happened in the past, and we're in touch a lot with colleagues at the National Family Farm Coalition, the Western Organization of Resource Councils, to think through what would be a few priorities for that work. So what we settled on were three issues. The first is to improve transparency in food labels. For many years now, mandatory country of origin labeling for meat has been a priority for farm groups and trade agreements. We have this program, COOL, for fruits and vegetables and other things, but in the case of meat, it was challenged at the WTO in 2009 in a suit brought by Canada with Mexico, and after a series of appeals, was eventually ruled illegal under the trade rules in 2015. The panelists found that it distorted trade, that it unfairly restricted trade, and that particularly that the record-keeping aspects were overly burdensome. Now, if you think about what we knew in 2015 and all of the data we know now, just that by itself has to be an entirely different situation than it was back then. But in any case, as we looked at this, the analysis of the trade rules, the legislation in Congress, where people were trying to find a version that could fit with the trade rules, we concluded that the problem really was the trade rules themselves. So our solution was to propose a kind of peace clause where the three countries would agree not to sue each other over this, but also on other labeling issues. Mexico has a really important food law they passed last year that includes GMO labeling, better nutrition labeling, things that have been subject to trade tension in the past. So that kind of issue, too, of improving transparency in the food system is something we think could move things forward. The second issue is to encourage innovative seed systems. One thing we hear in our work on agroecology around the world is that restrictions on how farmers save and share seeds is a real problem for those kinds of innovations. There's a treaty called UPAW of 91 that bans farmers from saving and sharing seeds. And somehow that treaty ended up in our trade agreements. So USMCA, like many other agreements negotiated by the US, requires countries to adhere to that provision, even if they have their own system that could work to balance the rights of breeders and users of seeds. So that is an issue where we say this is overreach. It doesn't belong there and it should be removed. It also sparks more of a conversation about what are some of the obstacles to agroecology. And then finally, developing new solutions to overproduction and low prices. That is a really complex problem, and that's something that overlaps a lot with Ben's work. In this case, we have focused in part on Canada's Dairy Supply Management Program. That's an important program that balances supply and demand of dairy at prices that are fair to consumers and farmers. It is supported by trade restrictions, quotas, and tariffs that keep it from being undermined by a flood of imports from the United States. So this is a case where we say, first of all, the trade disputes on that program should just stop. But instead, they should convene a commission to learn about that. How has it worked in Canada? Could some of those lessons apply in the US? There's big support for those kinds of ideas in the US. So in each of these cases, we have started with research, trying to understand exactly how these things work and how they work now, and then find the alliances to bring them forward. So looking forward to 2026, as I said, the review will continue. The next important date is January 2nd, when USTR should notify Congress of its proposals. And then by July, the three countries will agree or not on these proposals. Whatever happens, it's a moment to organize our efforts to find that trade alternative to move forward and to do so with partners in all three countries. And then I think we'll be digging in more on challenging the idea that I think Sophia also mentioned, that industrial agriculture feeds the world. We're starting research now to understand better today, what are we really trading in terms of agricultural goods? Is it food? Who's producing it? And think through particular questions. For example, in the US, we have a deficit in agricultural trade. It's mostly fruits and vegetables. What would it take to change that dynamic? So that's a new area we're moving into, that we're hoping to find some reasonable solutions moving forward and to connect it with the trade agenda. So I think I'll stop there and pass it on to Erin McKee, the director of our Community Food Systems program.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. It's really interesting to hear, and certainly I would echo what Sophia and my other colleagues have said about the challenges of this last year. But I will say that even despite the challenges at the national level, at the federal level, and everything happening in our communities, we at the state level have been able to make a lot of progress. And I am the program director for our Community Food Systems program. And our work is really grounded in Minnesota. And of course, we think about how it connects to the national, federal context and our international partners as well. But there has been an opportunity at the state level to keep trying to move things forward, even despite a lot of challenges, and the partners that I work with every day definitely feeling the impact of what's been happening at the federal level. But I will share on the farm to school and farm to early care side of things, we've been invested in that work for a long time. We think at IATP in terms of systems, and our engagement in the farm to kids world is really rooted in the belief that our public money should be invested back into our communities and really benefiting our farmers, our kids, and all Minnesotans, all of our community members. And we've done a lot to support that work over the years, and specifically this last year, we were able to publish some really wonderful usable resources that our partners have been very excited to get out there. Specifically, we have published a set of farm to early care resources that help connect our littlest eaters to fresh local food from Minnesotan farmers. And there are recipe ideas and ideas of hands-on activities that early care providers can do with their kids while they're giving them an opportunity to try those fresh local foods. And there were some K-12 resources like this, Harvest of the Month resources, but nothing serving the early care environment. So we're excited to get those littlest kids eating fresh local foods from the very beginning, and that really sets them up to have healthy eating preferences from the get-go and to be ready to take full advantage of farm to school once they get to kindergarten as well. We have been doing important research to document the impact of local purchasing in Minnesota in those public child nutrition programs, and to identify where the gaps of support exist and what opportunities there are to expand local purchasing. And we specifically have looked at, in Minnesota, we have a state farm to school and early care grant program, which IATP has been deeply involved in advocating for, along with our co-campaign leaders at Land Stewardship Project, LSP. And we have been watching that program to see, is it really benefiting farmers the way that we hoped that it would? And also, how can we improve it? How can we expand on it? And we published a recent report looking at what purchases were made in 2023 and how that local investment is circulating and benefiting local economies in Minnesota. When the state dedicated that funding to farm to school, it's actually generating an additional dollar for every dollar that they invested that circulates in local communities and benefits local farmers. We're really excited to see that evidence because it helps us back up when we're doing our policy advocacy and campaigns as well. So when we do systems engagement, we want to work with the decision makers and advocate for those budgets and programs that are building up a fair and just farm and food system in our state, and making sure that the impacted community members have a chance to engage in the decision-making processes. So as I mentioned, IATP has been working on farm to kids policy advocacy for a long time. And I will say that this year we started the legislative session in Minnesota at the beginning of the year in a very challenging budgetary situation where we didn't have a very big surplus at all. And many of us working in the farm and food systems world were worried that they were going to be cutting the funding for the programs that we care about so much. But we were doing a lot of advocacy. We had a lot of farmers and nutrition directors and community members who were able to testify about the impact of these local procurement programs. And in the end, we were very excited that we actually saw an increase of $550,000 for Farm to Kids grant programs. And that's included in the base of Minnesota's budget. So it's a continued funding increase, and it actually will go up even more in the second year of the biennium. That was a huge win against pretty strong headwinds. So we were pretty impressed that decision makers recognized the importance of this investment. We also had a huge blow in the spring, and I think I recognized some of the attendees on the call today, and I know some of you know about this very devastating decision that the administration made to cancel the local food purchasing program support. And we in Minnesota were really excited about the promised $17.9 million of federal funding that we had a signed cooperative agreement in our state MDA, our Department of Agriculture, had a signed agreement with USDA, and it was abruptly terminated this spring. The funding had not yet come into the state, and so we didn't have a recourse to try to secure that funding again. At the state level in Minnesota, we were among the first states to establish a state level local food purchase assistance program that will connect local farmers with food assistance programs in our state. That program is brand new and it started with $1.4 million of funding. So obviously that's not, we at the state level are not able to replace that $17.9 million of investment that we expected over the next 3 years, but we are at least seeing from our decision makers a recognition that we need to fill in some of the gap and try to still protect our farmers and our communities and invest back in them. I will also just say one other highlight of this last year, in addition to working specifically on the Farm to Kids policy campaign, IATP is also home to the Mini Ag Network of Minnesota Farm and Food Systems organizations. And with our co-coordinators from LSP and Minnesota Farmers Union and MN350, we got some huge things done in 2025, including we overhauled our Mini Ag website. We got a new logo with support from Christina Vang of LeBang Studios. She's a great designer, local designer. And we published a set of multilingual, ready-to-use Minnesota Ag Policy 101 resources. So we are providing civic engagement orientation, connecting farmers and community members to our decision makers. Please check it out. We also have a newsletter. So if you are based in Minnesota, you can join and get that newsletter as well and stay in the loop about what's happening in Minnesota's legislative session that will impact our farm and food systems. Looking ahead, I'm very excited about the next steps of a project that we're working on in partnership with the University of Minnesota. And Dr. Hikaru Peterson is our main partner there. We've been doing participatory research to identify what supports Minnesota farmers need to implement climate resilient farming practices. And we conducted a statewide survey. We heard back from more than 400 farmers around the state about what they need. So the next step of that project will be translating that farmer feedback and our other research into actionable programs that we can advocate for at the state level. And with the challenges of the federal environment, I am very happy that we have strong momentum going on with Mini Ag, with all of our partners, and a pretty receptive environment to get things done. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Erin, for providing that summary. And we have a few minutes now at the end to go ahead and answer a couple of questions. And I'm actually just going to throw it right back to Ben, because we did receive a couple of questions around the Farm Bill and in our registration. So one of them is, what is going on with the Farm Bill? And you briefly mentioned it. And how do we get, some things like antitrust reform maybe included into the Farm Bill? And how can we keep some things out of the Farm Bill, like the EATS Act? And I know that's an answer you can have in 30 seconds. So.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I think the Farm Bill environment is very difficult right now. The dysfunction in Congress is extremely high. I think there is some momentum you can see around competition, even that's carrying forward somewhat from the Biden administration, where they were quite strong on competition issues and were sort of moving a number of different important rules forward and completed some of them. And there has been pushback from Congress to try to undermine what the Biden administration has done, particularly around the Package and Stockyards Act rules. We've been able to push back against that, us and some of our partners so far. The EATS Act, if people don't know, is really an attempt to undermine states taking action on food and agriculture, particularly around animal welfare issues and a particular law in California around hog confinement. But it's broader than that. And so far, we've been able to really push back. I think there's been some great work by other organizations really to lift up how that particular bill would hurt farmers. I think it's being framed as something that is pro-farmer. Let's get rid of these regulations. But in fact, many farmers have changed the way that they raise hogs and are benefiting from better prices because of that. So giving those farmer voices on that has been quite powerful, and hopefully we can keep it out. The ability of Congress to pass anything, including bad stuff right now, is kind of limited. So, but we will continue to push, this farm crisis that's taking place right now, the tariff-related chaos that Karen talked about, is real and it's really severe. And I think it's changing the political dynamic. I'm not sure that it's going to create opportunities for really good policy. I think that remains to be seen, but it is definitely changing the discussion and debate about what type of food and farm system we want. So I think that's the best I can say right now.
Okay, well, thanks, Ben. And that kind of takes me to another question that I'll put to Sophia. Sophia, Ben was talking about, the EATS Act and hogs and animal agriculture. And we did receive a question around how can IATP in the world make more progress towards a less industrial animal agriculture system and maybe a more plant-based diet? And how does that work with maybe integrating livestock into agroecology?
Yeah, that was a great question, and I feel like it tags a little bit with Molly's question in the chat about dairy and the emissions there, and the way our milk industry is. There's a lot to say about milk, but I think so. It's hard to have quick answers. These are definitely questions that are big for IATP, and I work in Europe as well, looking at a just transition, especially for livestock farming. It brings together a lot of questions around the use of our land and how much goes to feed and to other products rather than to food. Questions of environmental justice, where these animal concentrated farms are sited, is usually where local communities had a very hard time even just getting existing law enforced, let alone changing the laws to be more cognizant of the problems the industrial animal systems can create. I think we're going to have to do it as a system. This is why we talk about a just transition. It's, I think, coming also. What we would like is to see better shaping of that arc. We're going to change what we grow and what we consume. A lot of times we're confronted with this sort of false question, I think, about, well, how will you supply the food we have now, but in a more environmental way? And the point is, actually, we waste a huge amount of food. We grow a lot more than we need of many things. And Karen's point about, changing the incentives and the structures of what we have so that we have redundancy in the form of biodiversity capacity, land that isn't used all the time at maximum effect. Natural resources that are husbanded, like water, rather than squandered as they are now, but protecting also biodiversity because our growing conditions are changing, and working at the same time with consumers on assumptions about what they want to consume. And this really important work around how companies selling ultra processed foods, like foods where you would no longer recognize the ingredients that have gone into them, are very systematically pushing those foods into markets, creating science around that. I say creating science because there's a lot of conflicts of interest in the publications that they have, and correlation with very poor health outcomes for people. And so I think we'll see a number of places where the pressure will come at the same time. And one of them will be consumers wanting and asking to eat better. And Erin's work, of course, is lifting that up as well. When you talk within a community about what's served to kids on their tray, families have a lot to say about what they want to see on that tray and what food would be good for them. And a lot of potential synergy is available to us if we just look around at who's growing foods there, and how that would meet a number of demands, including rural economic needs. So changing what we consume, downscaling and decentralizing, a lot of questions of scale, a lot of things that are fine 2 or 3 and not so fine when it's 2 and 300. And I think that we've learned a lot about that, and climate science reinforces the point, but also market economics will reinforce the point that there's value in protecting competition through decentralizing and downscaling. And finally, we'll need more regulation. We have rules about what kind of business you can run. You can't just set up a business and enslave people. you also should not be able to set up a business and dump whatever you want in the water for it to be managed downstream. You shouldn't be able just to burn whatever you want into the atmosphere. And I think that we've had a tension-filled history of how we come about that. But I think if we start by talking with rural communities about what's going on where they are, and I think water has been one of those issues that's brought a lot of rural communities together, then we'll be able to develop together how to use our common resources in ways that are less destructive, and they will make animal agriculture unsustainable. It already is, but we'll cease to sustain it with what we have now, which is public subsidies and things that go to the wrong kind of ag. I'll stop there, Claudia. It's a big question.
Yes, it is. And we are actually also at the end of our time. And unfortunately, we don't have any more time to answer more questions, even though we could probably sit here for another hour. We do have the questions in the chat. We also have the questions that you sent to us, and we will follow up with those. And we want to thank you again for joining us this year throughout these sessions of Shaping the Future of Food. You know, we're happy, we're thrilled that you're interested in our work, and so many of you join us every time we have these sessions, and we wish everybody a great holiday season, whichever holidays you celebrate, and a happy new year. And thank you again, and we'll see you all in the next year. Thank you.